everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to welcome our guest speaker for today, Barbara Paes. She's a Brazilian activist and researcher. She's a gender and race specialist and co-founder of Minas Programam, which translates to Girls Do Code in English. And it's an initiative designed to share knowledge about technology with girls and women from Sao Paulo, Brazil. And it's a great example of social innovation and social impact. And while they don't explicitly use human-centered design, their approach shares a lot of values and methods similar to human-centered design and community-centered design. And Minas Programam is a collective project from Sao Paulo led by mostly young women of color. It is a safe space for girls and women to learn programming skills and other abilities. And it's interesting to see how far they've reached since started in 2015, from collecting data on gender and race disparities in STEM fields to being featured on Forbes magazine this year. And I think it can be a very inspiring talk to us all. This will be a 40-minute presentation, followed by 20-minute Q&A at the end. So without further ado, Barbara, please, you have the floor now. I will share my screen.
Cool. So yeah, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, cool. So yeah, first I'd like to start by thanking the DFA and also Bruna personally for inviting me to speak today. Yeah, Bruna, like she said, we've known each other for a while, and she saw firsthand how Minas Programam grew and how our program changed and shaped the ways that we think about technology. It's really nice to be with all of you here today. Like I was saying and joking in the beginning of the conversation, I know everyone's experiencing Zoom fatigue, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. As you probably will realize throughout this event, I talk a lot, especially about things I like. So I'll make sure to stick to the proposed time and leave lots of room for conversations, because the other thing I really like other than talking is talking to people. So I would love to hear from you and about the projects that you're doing and anything else. So I'll start by speaking a little about myself before getting into Minas Programam. The bulk of my professional life has been working with civil society organizations whose work is somehow linked to tech and human rights. I also have spent quite some time thinking about feminism and how factors like gender and race interact with our different experiences and backgrounds. And when I say quite some time, I'm being very generous because I'm really young. So I actually mean like 7 years, not that long. And like Bruna said, we at Minas Programam are a collective project from Sao Paulo. I don't think the English language does justice to our name. Minas Programam, in Sao Paulo, the word Minas means roughly chick or girls, and they can program or code. And yeah, and I feel, yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide, please, Bruna. Thank you. So why do we exist? I'm gonna try to kind of like paint a picture of why such a project is needed, not only Minas Programam, but also other projects in Sao Paulo who are doing, and in Brazil, who are doing similar work. So Fernanda, Ariane, and myself, we kind of kicked off this idea back in 2015 because the three of us had experience working with tech in different areas. I was working for a civil society organization, so was Fernanda. We didn't really had a tech background per se. And then Ariane, who is the other co-founder, she was a designer who also had some coding skills. And the three of us had some background in feminist activism, like Bruna said. And we just started wondering how come it was so difficult for us to learn about technology in our context. So yeah, why didn't we have space in these discussions about digital rights and the discussions about how tech influences our lives? Why didn't people expect us to have space in those discussions? And what we saw was that it was super difficult to get into that space. Even for us who had relative privilege, we were, attending an elite university in Brazil. We were working for, very well-known organizations. And even for us, it was super difficult to get into that space. This photo that you're seeing is from, I think, one of our intro to coding classes from 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And this photo is not a common thing to see in Brazil. So I'm not sure how much you know about Brazil demographics, but we're mostly a country, like most of our population is Black. And we also have a considerable population of indigenous people and also many other combinations. But if you go into universities, if you go into tech companies, most people there will be white and will be male. So this, to have a room full of young women of color learning how to code is not a common sight yet. So to show you a little bit how weird the situation is in Brazil for women in STEM, I brought some data that we collected, and I'll show you in a few minutes. But what I wanted to say is that in our context, the majority of people creating tech, or at least getting visibility for creating tech or thinking about tech or designing new solutions, are male and white. And we started thinking about how that reflected the type of tech that was being designed, the type of things that were being created. So on the next slide, you can see some data that we collected through the Access to Information Law, when a few years ago, the Access to Information Law was still functioning properly here in Brazil, and our government was still somewhat considerate of transparency. So we filed this FOIA request, the Freedom of Information Act, and we were wondering just how much trouble were we in terms of, people in studying STEM, science, technology, but we were looking specifically at computer science courses. So this is data from the Ministry of Education, and it shows that Brazil, over the past few years, decades really, had a massive increase in people who were able to attend university. So a lot of people who before didn't have conditions to attend university, universities weren't big enough, inequality was huge, still is. So we saw a massive increase of people who were able to attend university. But if you take a look, you can see in yellow, those are the total of people who are enrolling in computer science courses in Brazilian universities. And you can see that there's kind of a steady growth, not really that steady, but you can see that there's a growth. But if you look at the purple lines, you can see that the proportion of women kind of stayed it didn't really follow the curve. And on the next slide, you can see that actually the percentage of women who got a degree in computer science decreased dramatically. So while we were having more people, while access to university was increasing, still is increasing, the proportion of women in that field is not. And this is true to a lot of other fields in hard sciences. And this is just looking at gender. When we look at other aspects of our existence, like race, those data become even more accentuated. The disparities become even more accentuated. So this slide really shows how this plays out, because it's not just in universities. This is spread out to our society as a whole. Here I got some data for you. So only 17% of computer sciences in Brazil today are women. And even when women and men have the same educational background and are in the same profession, women still make 34% less. But when we're talking about Black women who are professionals, they can make as little as 159% less than white men in the same profession who graduated from similar universities. So our perceptions about the lack of women who look like us in tech were more than just perceptions. They were a reflection of how this industry, in academia, in companies, in the public sector, how this industry was really skewed and how uneven and unequal it was. So all of that sparked some questions. And if you could move on to the next slide. I feel like we're back in undergrad, Bruna, because I keep saying next slide. I'm sorry, the previous slide. So all of that sparked some questions about the relation between technology and society. So we were, when we started thinking about this, we started reading a lot and started thinking, how come this is the case? How come this disparity is so big here in Brazil? How come so much of the tech that we use isn't really right for us, in the sense that really doesn't serve us our needs? And why so much of the mainstream tech is reproducing inequality out there? And then all of those questions were kind of related to the idea that the world around us influences how we interact with tech. So something that became really fundamental to us was understanding that gender informs tech as much as tech informs gender, and the same goes for race and other, social markers of inequality. And we really started thinking about how machismo in Brazil, how sexism in Brazil, and how racism in Brazil affect how and which girls and women will interact with technology and how they will interact with technology. And we realized a big problem was that I'm sorry if I'm speaking too fast, by the way, I get really worked up about this. So we realized that a really big problem was that there were limited spaces where we could go to learn about tech, to learn how to code, to learn, a wide range of skills that we were curious about. Because there's this narrative that tech and that designing tech is something that only a few people are, meant to do. Those spaces at the time, and most of them are still like this, were mostly male, mostly white, and way too expensive. And most of them were not just that, they were also deeply full of stereotypes about who can be a technologist, who can be a designer, who is, equipped to design tech. And all of those stereotypes lead to attacks on the intellectual self-esteem of girls and women out there, and here actually in Sao Paulo. And this, means being singled out in tech, in classes, and being told that you're not capable by peers and by teachers. And so essentially what we did was started wondering how to create a space for girls like us, for women like us, who wanted to learn about these things. Next slide. So we started thinking about how our participation in tech would affect the way that our ideas and our needs are represented in tech. So we kind of were thinking, I think a sentence that back when we started that we kept repeating was that the solutions that are meant for us will only be created by us, so we need to learn. So how did we start? We partnered with a local feminist organization that Ariane, one of our co-founders, was a part of. And we started by listening to women and girls who we already knew and who were already working on this issue. And we got together and created a space that women, like a physical, literal space, where women could learn how to code. So we recruited a few different instructors and teachers who are all women and who had most of their experiences had been, I'm the only programmer at this software company I work at. I'm the only, coder in this place. So I would love to have more women here. Let's, show how it's done. Let's teach them. So what we try to do, and we're still trying to do it, is fostering conditions that allow for people to learn in a way that is as free and as, when I say free, I mean less oppressive as possible. We know that formal education is often the space where people who are different than, the straight white male, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, are often, challenged in a very bad way and not in a positive way. So we try to foster conditions where we can thrive, where we can learn from other women, from people, from non-binary people as well, And if you know Sao Paulo, or if you know how unequal cities in the global south may be, you know that for some people it's really cheap and it's really doable to learn new skills. But you also know that for other people it's really impossible and really difficult. So what we try to do is have this space be free. So most of our courses are free, or they're either free or really, really cheap when we partner with certain organizations that charge something. We try to provide meals, we try to provide bus fare, we try to provide care services, because we know a lot of our students they have care duties at home. So we try to make sure that all of those things are taken care of as much as we can, so that our students can have, the mental space to actually go in and learn what we can share. And so we can learn from them as well. All of our instructors and teachers are women, and we try to have as many women of color as we can. And something that really we see as really important is having space to mix technical skill and technical knowledge with debates about the interaction of tech and society. Our courses always try to combine those two elements, because we see that understanding why, or understanding that you're not the only, the only woman who's struggling with fitting in your company or in your course that you're taking at university, understanding that there's a patriarchal structure that teaches society that women are not cut out for tech, actually can really empower you and help you feel, like, oh yeah, it's not me. It's actually this whole structure that exists that is telling me that I'm not good for this. So we always try to combine those things. We talk about digital security, about open software, and about, I think, above all, we keep challenging the notion that technology is something neutral, because it's not. And I think that's one of our greatest assets. If you move to the next, so I forgot to talk about what we actually do. So we do intro to coding classes, but we also do Python classes, JavaScript, digital security. We also teach WordPress sometimes, and more. I think we are super open to what the students want to learn and how they want to learn it. And our main thing is that we want to make sure that information is shared widely. And we have this, I don't know if this makes sense in English, but we always say that we're trying to democratize access to information about technology, because this is super niched and it's very elitist here in Brazil. So we try to share knowledge about this as widely as possible. We've had over 150 students in our intro to coding classes, but in all of our workshops and talks and activities and hackathons and all of that, we've had over 2,000 participants. Yes, now next slide. So this is just some data that we recently did a survey with our former students, and we learned that over 60% of them are still working with tech, and 30% of them are still studying tech or still interested in tech, and 70% of them started to encourage and incentivize people around them, women around them, to learn about tech. I think this is one of our biggest, this last one is one of our biggest contributions. Being a space that contributes to shaping the narrative about who can design tech is one of our greatest, one of the things that we are most proud of. And not only reshaping intellectual self-esteem of our students and our own, but also sharing knowledge and tools that allow people to start their own journeys with tech. I think that in a country that never intended for Black girls and for women in color in general to have dreams, to exercise power, to create things, it's really amazing to be able to contribute to change somehow, to contribute to something that can change the collective imagination about what we can do and how we can do it. On the next slide, we have some, beyond the numbers, some, I think they look super small, but it's some of our students from the previous years who are sharing their experience with Minas Programam. So we have Tabitha, who studies geography and who took our course, and who's also a member of our study group on gender, tech, and race. We have Ana Beatriz, who managed to get a job right after graduating from one of our courses in a partnership that we did with a local tech company. We also have Mara, who had, after a few years of trying to do a career transition to technology after our course, also landed a job, and all of them are super talented, so it's all on them, but we were really happy to be a part of their story. And same goes with Yara, the last one. She works in marketing and advertising and had been really wanting to get tech skills, and we were super happy to be a part of that journey. I think above all, for us, being able to contribute to, the brilliant things that all of these women have to, all the brilliant things that they have going on their brains, and, sharing tools and skills for all of us to be able to materialize that is just, I'm really proud of it. On the next slide, I bring a more practical example of how our students are brilliant. This was an app, Violências Invisíveis means invisible violences, and now I just realized I could very easily have translated that into the slide. But this was one of a few examples from previous years of our students just being brilliant and doing really cool things that are situated in their contexts and their experiences. So a team of students from our course, a few of them are here in the picture, they took part of a hackathon held by a civil society organization here in Brazil. And some of them had connections with activists in their neighborhoods. Some of them were activists. Some of them have witnessed how hard it is to mobilize, especially if you don't have like the narrative power of, big media behind you, especially if you're a Black young woman. It's really hard to mobilize and get attention. So what they did is that at this hackathon, they came together, and you see all of their names there, and they built a tool for social organizing and civic mobilization. So what their app does is that it makes it super easy for women, and Black women specifically, from the periferia, we call it, like the underprivileged neighborhoods of Sao Paulo. So what this app does is that it supports Black women from those regions to create online petitions and campaigns to mobilize based on their needs and the causes that are useful for their contexts and that are important to them. And what I think is cool about this, because I realized that not all solutions are going to be apps, like, do we really need hundreds of apps? Maybe not. But nevertheless, what I really think is cool about this experience is to see this group lead the design of a tool that works for their context, that fits their experiences, without having to go through intermediaries who don't understand their contexts, whose biases might be built into whatever solution that they, build. So that's what I think is really amazing about this group and about what they did. And we have a lot of examples from this type of work, and I think that it's really amazing to see that we can contribute to something like this being built. So yeah, on the next slide, I think, which is going to be my final slide because I've been speaking for a while now, I want to talk about what does it mean to create a space like this for us. Like I said, I think one of our most relevant accomplishments is creating a more critical approach about how we understand the impact of technology in our lives. Much of the mainstream technologies that we're using today are tools that perpetuate the patriarchy, perpetuate racism, homophobia, transphobia, and many other things that impact the lives of girls and women of color in Sao Paulo. And ultimately, what we want is more than just having more women programmers. We want more than just having more women coding. I think what we really want and what we really strive to do is foster the collective potential to create tech that's emancipatory, that is based on social justice. I think what we've learned all these years and what our students have shown us is that tech solutions are only as relevant, tech solutions, because I don't think, techs, can be a solution to everything, but they're only as relevant as the people who create them. I think their relevance to society depends a lot on who's behind the design of that tool. And I think that tech can only be as useful as the principles that guide it. The tech solutions and advances that come up as the problems that those solutions try to fix are influenced by who's working on those innovations, who's testing it, who's modifying it, who's thinking about it. And what we learned also is that we need to be more creative about how we share information about tech and about design. This photo is from our recent study group on gender, tech, and race. And we talked about many things during that study group. We had a few sessions this year, and as you can see, it's also on Zoom. And something that came up a lot is that we need to be more creative about how we exchange knowledge about tech if we really want to build things and think about things in a way that actually is positive and is focused on social justice. I think for all of us, it's really easy to think of designers as a special group of people who's made by experts and who have access to very specific knowledge, and it's really easy to pigeonhole who should be the people behind designing technology. And what we really started thinking is about how we need to think about design as a much broader group of people. And I think something that really has influenced us is the really amazing book Design Justice by Sasha Constanza Schock. And something that we have been talking about a lot is how designers should be the people that can build the worlds that we need and want. To create really necessary things, we need design needs to come from people who have been historically marginalized. It needs to be focused on sustaining and supporting communities, and we need to kind of move on from that place where we kind of see the design of tech as in a little club, a little bubble. And I know I might be speaking to people who are already, I'm sure I am speaking to people who are already thinking about this, but yeah, this is something that came up. For us, this meant a lot looking at indigenous knowledge in Brazil, looking at how Black people in Brazil have been thinking about technology for a really long time and have been developing tech for centuries, and that is often overlooked. Yeah, and this is something that has been in our minds a lot, how we need to be more creative about how we share information and how we need to think about tech in a much more broader and more inclusive way. Yeah, and I think I'm gonna wrap up here. I still have like about 10 minutes to spare, but yeah, I think I gave quite a lot of information already, and I'd love to hear if you have any questions or thoughts you want to share.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. I actually have a question. I've never asked you this before, even though like we're friends for a long time and I know a lot about what Minas is doing. But how do you handle like for the students participating in workshops and the courses if they don't have the right equipment, like hardware disparities is also something that is a problem in Brazil. So how do you handle that?
Cool. So what we do is that for the first time we did it, the feminist organizations that we were teaming up with, they had about 10 laptops that they could borrow us so that our students could use So for the first cohort, that's what we did. So people who owned computers, they could bring their computers, and people who didn't, we provided them with those computers. And then this is actually a really good point that you raised, because it shows how, you know, access to technology really defines who's, you know, thinking about this. So then what we did is that we made sure that in the following years, we always had a partner, either a company or a university, or, you know, sometimes even our funders who would either provide the equipment or could provide us with resources to rent so that we could rent the equipment. And we found that that's really relevant. Something that we want to do moving forward is being able to actually, so our courses right now are about 2 months long. Our main intro to coding class, that's how long it takes. And we want to expand that over the next few years, and have our intro course be a little longer, about from 6 to 10 months. And then what we want to do is actually provide computers so people can actually take it home, study there, because we realize that it's great having it right there when you're taking the class, but sometimes you're home and you need to practice your coding and you don't have a computer at home. So it's something that we're always thinking about how to improve.
Cool.
Any questions? If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, you can also use the chat, and Bruna, I, and Valeria can read, and Barbara too. We can all read the chat.
Yeah, I actually have a question leading up to Bruna's question. I know from what I understand, you're talking about providing computers for or like any technology needed for a period of time of studying, but have you considered maybe working with trying to supply some of those who just can't afford to buy a computer and kind of like give them one for forever, kind of?
Yeah, that's what we're planning on doing. So we're talking to a few different funders right now to see how our next financial years are going to look like. And what we want to do is provide computers long term, or either for like a year and then students can give it back. Because what we've seen is that after, you know, getting jobs in the sector, oftentimes the students want to kind of give back to the project. So we still don't have it quite figured out how we want to do, but we do want to have a long-term plan for this. Yeah. I see a question if we are considering translating our website into other languages. Yes, we are. So we have currently a translation going. You know, it's being done to English, but we also want to do it to Spanish soon.
I have a question. I was really interested when you mentioned that when you are creating a space for your students to come and learn, you took into consideration that they're caregivers. Like, these are factors I feel like a lot of education programs don't think about. I was wondering how you came about that insight.
I think from the fact that a few of us were caregivers. A few of us had either to take care of our elderly parents. One of our main teachers is a mom, a recent young mom. Well, I mean, she's not that young, but her baby is. So she has an infant at home. So it was from the fact that all of us were also dealing with this. So we needed to create kind of the space that we wanted for ourselves. Honestly, we started this because we really wanted to learn some programming skills, and there weren't any spaces out there where we could do it at a reasonable, you know, price and at a reasonable company. So we kind of, all of those ideas came because we were living those things as well.
Okay, we have Shrisha has a question for you. Have you thought of expanding to areas other than Sao Paulo or Brazil? I know that this is an issue in many areas around the world, and it would be really beneficial.
Yes, so we have worked quite a lot in Rio. which is super close to Brazil if you don't really know Brazilian geography. And we have quite a strong partnership with an organization there who has a really similar framework and, you know, just way that they think. It's a really cool partner. I'm gonna drop their name here. It's called Preta Lab, and they do really cool, interesting work around this issue in Brazil. And one of the things they did was that they did the first survey of how our Indigenous and Black women in Brazil who are working in tech, how you know, how's their professional life? What's it looking like? It was really groundbreaking work. And then we do a few workshops with them we have done in the past. And then in September this year, we started a partnership that is really cool. We're really excited about it because it's beyond intro to programming. This partnership is about creating a course that teaches technologists a lot of things that they need to know, but that are not shared in formal academia. So it's really a lot of practical things and a lot of, I guess, like knowledge that comes after you've been working for a while. But it's really hard to get if you haven't had that opportunity, which is the case for many women of color. So in this partnership, we're doing a 3-month-long course in partnership with them. But for the first time, since we are all working from home and doing most of our things from home, this has given us an opportunity to have women from all around Brazil to participate. But yeah, so this year has been the year that we did quite a few activities with women from different states. So I think we have 5 different Brazilian states in that course right now. And also from our study group, we have 5 different regions represented. But it's really hard to scale up. The thing is, and I feel like this is true for many feminist projects out there, there's really limited funding for this type of work. And while we do have core study funding from FRIDA, a young feminist fund that I think some of you might know, we feel like it's really difficult to scale up when it's, the political situation in Brazil is crazy, and it's really difficult for feminist projects to get funding and sometimes to even get social acceptance to do the work. So we feel like Sao Paulo is a familiar enough context for us that allows us to kind of know who to partner with and who, how we can best develop our activities. We do, however, exchange a lot with groups from other states and other regions in Brazil, because there are so many cool groups doing really relevant work in different places. So we do try to exchange with those groups as much as we can, because there's so much to learn from them. I think something that is really interesting, really important to point out, is that Sao Paulo is quite a privileged area of Brazil. The Southeast in general is. So I think groups like Minas Programam, who are situated in, geographically situated here, get proportionately a lot more attention than other groups in the Northeast, in the North, and they're doing so much relevant work. So I think it's a collection of things: this lack of funding, lack of capacity, because there's only a few of us, and also I think there's so many interesting, relevant work already being done that I feel like our best place is to just support those groups. And I rambled a lot just now. So any other questions?
Can I jump in? First of all, thank you very much. I mean, it was fascinating to, see not only the kind of a background that you provided, and by the way, that resonates with a lot of studies I read in many other countries, unfortunately. So I guess it goes to Srisha's point, is like, can we, replicate rather than scale up? It was not the right term, I think. And I on that point, I was thinking that, to your point, you could maybe more like connect or build up. And also I feel like that each of these projects are like, there are so many both similarities, but also idiosyncrasies that are, you know, linked to the local context that maybe, you know, it doesn't make sense to, it's more of a template that you could, you know, share.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know how it would look like, but like kind of more of a model that could be, you know, shared with other people.
Yeah.
But so I had a question, you know, you said you're planning to expand the length of your programs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, you know, I can see you can learn more if it's longer, but I can also see that it might, you know, make it more difficult for people to participate if it's longer. So I'm just curious, like, you know, what was the rationale for doing that, and if you feel like that you're not going to lose people because it's like, oh, you know, 6 months or 8 months, that's a bigger commitment than 2 months.
Yeah, so the rationale was that so many of our students felt like after the, you know, 6 to 8 weeks that we currently have, they were at a really sweet spot where they were, you know, starting to learn things by themselves, and they were really getting into it, and then the course was over. And then we also heard from a lot of students that it was really, in that survey that we did, and then also in the community spaces that we foster with them, that the intro class was great, but they also wanted to take one step further. So the extension in length is our way of saying, okay, we can take one step further. But at the same time, we were thinking, who has the time to dedicate, you know, half their day to this for 6 months? People have to work. The majority of our students are either working full-time or studying full-time or doing both. So something that and if they're not working, they're looking for work. So something that we're thinking about how to do, and this is very dependent on funding and how we can, you know, gather some resources, is we want to provide a stipend for people to be able to attend the course and not have to lose income. So we were trying to, obviously, it's a very delicate subject because, you know, income is a very relative concept that depends highly on how people are living. So we're still thinking about that. But yeah, fingers crossed that we can move forward with this option. And then something else that we are thinking, and that we've tried in the past and it really worked, is having a very intensive 2 months, and then moving on to a less intensive model where people are still engaged, are still learning, are still, you know, participating in a community, but are not as deeply, you know, involved several days a week, you know, for half their day. And then this model, I guess both models, they include mentorship from our organizers and from our teachers. And we feel like that mentorship sometimes is what really kind of changes the experience, because a lot of this is also having confidence to kind of go and learn something by yourself, or asking other people, or figuring out that no one has it all figured out and no one has all the skills. So it's fine to ask for help. So yeah, creating a community of I don't really like the word mentorship, but like a community of exchanging between people who have a little more experience and people who are just a little more experienced in this sector, and people who have experience in other things but are trying to move on to this sector. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about funding? Because you mentioned some companies partnering up with the project. Do they ask something in return? How does that work?
Sure. So we have, right now, we have a core funding from Frida, who's a young feminist fund, and we've been with Frida, it's been 5 years now, so we're moving on to other partnerships so that Frida can welcome more amazing groups. And they do really incredible work, and they're funding really, really cool groups working on so many cool things. I highly recommend you take a look if you don't know them. And then, but it's really hard to get funding for this specifically because I think it's hard to find a match. I think it's hard to find funders who have a feminist approach to how we think about women in tech. Like I said during, my very fast speech, we don't want to necessarily see just more women in the sector. We want to see a shift in how tech is built. And I think there might be lots of funding for women in tech programs, but not necessarily for programs who are challenging how big tech is built. And I'm not saying that we're doing this in a very radical, way, but this is something that's really important for us. And so when we partner with companies, we're super picky about which companies we partner with. And we try to go for companies who are not necessarily looking for anything in return. We're just interested in providing a resource that they have. And we found a few different companies in Brazil who are willing to do that. And then also we found that I think in academia, we found quite a lot of room for that. So one of our partners from, I think, a few years back is a Catholic university here in Sao Paulo who said basically, well, we don't have classes on weekends. You can have classes on weekends here. So, and they didn't ask for anything in return other than their logo on some of our materials, which for us was fine. And also we partnered with different government departments. So the city of Sao Paulo used to have a very open innovation and tech hub. That's not the name in Portuguese, but anyway. So they used to provide us with resources and also space to host our activities. So I think it's not necessarily just about funding, but also about mobilizing resources that aren't necessarily funding, aren't necessarily a check, but are resources that are very valuable for us to be able to do the work. And I think those resources, we have been fairly able to mobilize them. But I think now that everyone's at home, we realize that we might need more resources that we currently have. And honestly, also, the demand for our courses is a lot bigger than we can actually tend to. So something that we're thinking about is how to not only get more funding for us, but also how to maybe create like an ecosystem of other organizations and groups who are also working on this. So thinking about how we mobilize resources, we've been trying to partner with groups who are doing similar work, like I said, Preta Lab, but also groups here in Sao Paulo, like Maria Lab, who does really cool work. I'm also gonna type her name here on the chat if anyone's curious. And I think working with those groups has really opened a lot of doors and gave us a lot of things to think about. But great. Yeah, funding's hard.
Yeah, but I like your point that it's more than just money, that it's like any types of resources that you can get, spaces, mentoring, teaching capabilities or skills.
Yeah, and I think it's what happens quite a bit with us is that there are always a few times of the year that companies become a bit desperate to show that they're really inclusive. So around, Women's International Day, or in Brazil, in November, when we have kind of our, Black Awareness Month.
Near Pride Day as well.
Yeah, during Pride, like all of those dates are dates where companies are emailing us all the time. In June this year, when we saw Black Lives Matter, protests sparked in the US, and then they kind of trickled down to other countries. So many international companies who have operations in Brazil got in touch with us. It was overwhelming. And it's really because we see a lot of companies who we know could afford to fund us, but who don't offer to fund us, but offer to have us go in, do a talk, and then publish on their social media so that they can look good. And I'm not saying all companies do this. We've had great partnerships with many companies, but it's something that we're really picky about because we realized that, yeah, that pinkwashing is a thing. So we have to be careful.
Great. I'm looking at the time. I know we have about like 5 more minutes. You know, it can be 10, but like as you said, everybody is zoomed in and out. So any kind of extra questions? I had plenty, but like I'm sure I can follow up with you after. But like any like 1 or 2 last questions for Barbara?
What is the best way to contact you in case anyone has more questions?
Okay, so the two, yeah, there's my website below, but also my social media handle. You can either DM me on Twitter or on my website. You can find my email and just email me. And please do. I'm very talkative.
About pinkwashing.
Oh yeah, pinkwashing is a term for, I guess, started in the context of the fight for LGBTQI plus rights, and it's used to kind of describe when marketing or advertising uses those rights or the narrative around those rights to sell their products. And sometimes there are companies that are not really worried about it, but they'll use it to sell something. So I kind of use that term to talk about companies who are not necessarily super big on having gender equality, for instance, or whose tech might perpetuate racism, but they come and email us close to Black Awareness Day. Yeah, it's good that I'm thinking. Sometimes it's not that good. Yeah. Oh yeah, my poster. Thank you.
I just had one last question. I mean,
sure.
As I said, I have many, but I was wondering, like, when you were saying, like, how you could grow and, funding resources, like, have you been, like, I was thinking of 2 things. One is, like, this community app that was designed by the young girls in the hackathon. Mm-hmm. Have you been thinking of ways of, getting them to, like, some of your students being involved in, like, some form of community service types of thing that could be sponsored by cities, or I don't know how the public government, like I know that in the US we have AmeriCorps, which are like service, it's money for young people to come and do service, and there are like a lot of nonprofit using that kind of funding. So that was kind of one idea that I thought. And for the other part, for the companies, I understand they just want to be on your social media, but I was wondering if there's a way, beyond the money aspect, if they could have, like, for example, for coaching, having some of your tech people helping, or even giving, some of your students internships. So kind of having a kind of, circular types of thing. And I'm sure you have already some of these things, but I don't know, I'm wondering if there's a way of like doing some form of programs, and so that when they kind of reach out to you, frantically because they want to look good, saying like, but it can help you to look good for a whole year rather than for a day.
Yeah, that's the thing. We have been super blunt about this with a lot of companies, and they have shifted how they approach us, which is good. So I think one of the slides where I showed our students, a couple of them actually got internships and then jobs with companies who at first approached us to do like campaigns, and then eventually we said, we more than just campaigns. People need jobs and people need to be represented in the sector. So I think there is definitely room for negotiation and room to show that we need more than just representation. We need active participation. And I think beyond that, I think, circling back to your first point, I think something that we've seen is that more and more our students are interested in doing their own thing. So going beyond, like going outside of those companies and, starting their own projects, starting their own businesses, starting their own ideas. And I think that's where we're really excited about. We're still going to, you know, have partnerships with companies, but what we're really excited about is seeing how we can help and foster those ideas that are beyond, are outside of, you know, big tech. Those ideas that are based on grassroots organizations. Those are the ideas that come from our students' experiences. Those are the things that I stay up at night thinking like, what's going to happen?
All right, it was so nice having you as our first speaker series event of the semester. I think we had a great start. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I think I can say it for everyone that we enjoyed learning more about what you do, and I think it is very, very important and necessary.
Thank you.